I know. Don't look at me dancing. It's terrible. But I need to say though, I love that new intro song. So and I apologize for people watching the recording because from now on you won't with the music. I'm removing them from the recording, so it's easier for you to start right up on the show. Saying that, it means that you need to go live and see the show live to have like that beautiful, like you want to dance type of music before the show.
There
So
it is.
yeah, go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, there it is. Yeah, you got to show up early if you want to get the jingle. The jingle is good.
It
I
is.
don't even think we should cut it out. It is catchy. It's got the right vibe. It gets you in here. You're feeling good. You're feeling ready to go. I don't know. I'm ready to do some Coopers now. I wasn't, and now I am.
You were not ready to do some Q first. We need to talk about this after the show, John. But no,
Thank you.
I know, I
Yeah,
know,
I'll
I
find
know.
the sofa and give you a call.
No. So thanks everybody for joining us live or people watching the live stream. And obviously, hello, our favorite giraffe. Hello, Alec. Thanks for joining us again. I know. Alec told us he even have a meeting in 30 minutes, but he said like I'm gonna be there for the beginning of the show and a dedicated person to the show. I love that. Always nice to see you here, and everybody else also nice to see you here. Welcome to that other episode of Q First Live. I was talking to John before the show because I'm finally it's due since forever to have like to have timestamp to the recording of the live stream, and I was checking all the videos that we've done so far, and oh my god. Doing a show every 2 weeks, it's starting to pile up and in a good way. I mean, I was just amazed by the number of videos we have now in the YouTube channel, all those live streams that we've done. And for those of you that are new to Q1st, you're going to stream on a lot of interesting topics because I'm going to share links to a lot of them. And today, if you're used to Q1st Live, we have a different show for you. You know, we have two types of show. Usually, we either get a guest and we talk about their technology and we try to help you understand and learn more about the technology that could hopefully help you being successful. And the other type of show we do is all about Cube First, where is it's usually like an in-depth show about a specific technology we use in Cube First, or how to do a specific thing when it comes to our beautiful, amazing, wonderful platform. But today we're going to do something live. I know we're going to do some, actually I say we, John's going to do all the job today. Is going to go and do some live diagramming. Is it a verb? It is a verb today.
Yeah, we
You're
can
going
do
to
that.
do some live diagramming. Oh my god, diagramming. I don't know why. There's some words in English that I struggle, but anyway, today that's going to be all a show all about Cube First. That's going to be quite exciting, John, because we're going to talk about the Cube First architecture. You know, we have those nice diagram in the docs. We have information on the website. Every time we do a show, we show a little bit of like part of the architecture. We talk a little bit about it, but I don't think we've ever done a show where we just talk about the architecture and how we build Cube First and what is the cluster also that you get at the end when you create a cluster using Cube First. And we're going to do this with like beautiful diagram, logo, and an application that we're all fans of, Excalibur. Excalibur is the minute I discovered that tool, it was like all my diagrams are made with
I
that
know.
tool now.
It's so nice. It
I
is.
just love it. I just love it. So Patrick is there. Hi, Patrick. It's been 2 weeks that we've seen each other, and same thing for the friend Douglas. Thanks for joining us again today. You know what, folks? I love that when people just say "I." It's just nice because I know how many people is watching, but it's still nice to have like a hey, hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever, where you're from, depending on your time zone. So feel free to just say I, even if you don't have any question. But also, you've seen the banner that I put in the show, and I say like, hey, have a question, ask on the chat. If you don't have any question, just say I. I put those all the time because again, if it was just a show about like me and John talking, that would be a boring show. Sorry, John, but like that's the truth. We need guests. We need you to ask questions, to comment on stuff, and the more the merrier. We're gonna be happy with that. So on that note, I'm talking too much. I think John, unless you have anything else to say to folks, I think it's time to start talking about kubefirst architecture and seeing those lovely diagrams that you're gonna do live.
Yeah. No, I do want to double down on your comment though, Fred. From a different selfish perspective, I really enjoy it when people say hi. I
Mhm.
have this crippling inability when I'm talking to humans of not being able to read notifications anywhere. I don't see them. My team is constantly spewing information at me, and I'm just locked in on live stream
Mhm.
and I see nothing. So even though there's a little indicator up there that you can remind me to look up, and I'll look up at it. I'm not going to otherwise. So every time I see somebody saying hello, it's basically the first time I saw that somebody was in here. So it's super nice.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
But yeah, let's get into some
Let's
kubefirst
do that.
architecture. I think I we kind of take it for granted at the kubefirst shop what the architecture is. We have to live it, breathe it, understand it inside out. We have a whole bunch of different details that are just top of mind all the time. But that's not true for our users. And I hope that this live stream is going to be insightful. At least reaffirm what our users are probably thinking about how stuff works. But hopefully we'll be able to, produce a good video out of this, educate some folks on how stuff works. And at the end, I think we'll have a pretty sweet diagram that we can put up on our docs or something. And that'd be
Oh
super
yeah.
cool too. So without further ado, let's get
Let's
into
do
it.
that.
I think we should start with a picture of you. Let's do that. We need
Now I'm
somebody.
afraid.
Here's you, our kubefirst viewers. You're definitely happy, maybe a little concerned. We'll put a little bit. Oh no, that's terrible. We can't do that.
Yeah,
We'll
now
do
you're
a
drawing the
smile,
Joker.
a little bit of a smirk, crazy hair. How about some crazy hair?
Oh no,
Uh,
I'm not a kubefirst user though.
okay, we'll get rid of the hair. We'll do some sweet legs. We'll get some arms out here. We'll do a laptop. And let's raise that laptop up to right there. And this is
Wow.
not bad, right?
I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
Oh, thanks,
People
buddy.
wouldn't know that I have a laptop in my hand if I was going to draw that thing. So I'm happy you're the one doing the diagrams.
All right. Well, we're starting out well, I think. This is you. And you, as a kubefirst user, probably want to have a cloud native platform in a few minutes. And you get to start from mostly scratch. And we're going to show you how that works. So um, we should bring into this space. Can I zoom out? There we go. So let's go. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I have another diagram over here. Okay, so I'm going to bring in some canned images of some stuff that we have. So up in kubefirst land, we have two very important repositories that are responsible for creating some repositories that you keep. The first one is the kubefirst repository. We don't really reference any of the code in the kubefirst repository when you do a platform creation. But there is a binary that we keep in our releases in kubefirst. You can download that binary with Brew, or you can grab it right off of our kubefirst releases page. And the other repository that's important to know about is the GitOps template repository. This is a repository that has all of the pre-prescribed configurations for all of the different stacks of kubefirst that you can install. So most of our viewers will know that you can install kubefirst to a lot of different clouds. You can install it locally. You can install it via K3S to a cloud that we don't yet support. And the way that we're able to accommodate all of those different stacks is that up in our GitOps template repository, I'll reference it super quickly. If you go to kubefirst, and then let's go to GitOps template. So in this repository, we'll have a directory for each one of the flavors of kubefirst that we support. So when you do, for example, a Civo GitHub installation, we're using everything from this directory in our GitOps template to create what is your GitOps repository. So how does that happen? Let's talk through that. The first thing to understand is that there's truly three distinct ways to do a kubefirst installation. The most common way is using a tool that we have called the kubefirst CLI that you can brew install. This kubefirst CLI is downloaded from brew from this repository here. Now, if you use a kubefirst CLI install, you have a couple commands that you can run. You can run kubefirst launch up, or you can run a kubefirst cloud create command. If you do kubefirst launch up, it'll bring up a user interface. And if you don't want the user interface, you just want the command, then you can do kubefirst cloud name create. When you do either of those two operations, we are going to, let me change this to a solid line, and we'll call this the kubefirst console.
No, you can understand the two previous comments, John, that I didn't read yet. I showed them to the people, but you change the type of the line for the diagram. Patrick was saying a hidden talent from John is to draw memes, I guess. And Jairo was saying it's modern art.
It is a modern art. It's true. It's true. I'm just trying to keep up with my children, Fred. It's a tough life. So the kubefirst CLI, when you do either a kubefirst launch up or a kubefirst Civo create or a kubefirst AWS create or whatever cloud you want to provision to, we're going to create a K3D cluster on your laptop. And what we do in there is we're basically Helm installing kubefirst. So these two applications here get installed to your K3D cluster. And when you do a kubefirst launch up, which let me annotate that. We create this cluster on your laptop, we Helm install kubefirst to it, and then we ask you, in fact, we launch for you a browser that's pointed at console.kubefirst.dev, which is just a fake DNS Ingress that resolves to your local host so that you get a nice Ingress experience with using kubefirst. And then you get your typical kubefirst provisioning screen, and we ask you some questions about what cloud you want to install to, and then we start creating your management cluster. Now that's how it works when we're talking about kubefirst launch up. We have other ways to install kubefirst. We have a marketplace implementation. And the marketplace implementation follows the same architectural setup. It does not run on your laptop though. So with the marketplaces, We have currently we are available in the Cibo and DigitalOcean marketplaces. And you can go to Cibo and just click, I would like to create a new Kubernetes cluster. And then the last panel that it shows you has some apps that you can add on. And if you add kubefirst, then you'll be creating that provisioning software in your new Cibo cluster. So Cibo will host your cluster 0 instead of it being on your laptop like it is over here. On DigitalOcean, it's the exact same architecture. It's just a slightly different experience. You go to the DigitalOcean one-click Kubernetes apps, and then you find kubefirst and say you would like to install it, and they'll create a cluster for you with the kubefirst installer installed to it. In both of those cases, you're going to port forward to the service. We could ingress it, but we don't want to ingress it because there's sensitive content in your cluster 0, and we don't want that exposed over the internet unless we have a way to authenticate you, and we haven't built Vault yet, so there's no good way to authenticate you. So it's just a port forward to the service while it's in cluster 0, and that's how you get to your provisioning software. The last option for installing is one where you don't want us to create a cluster for you at all. And you already have a perfectly fine functional DevOps cluster or a cluster on your laptop or whatever, and you just want to reuse that instead. In that scenario, you would be up here in your own cluster. We'll call this BYO cluster. And all you have to do is helm install kubefirst, and kubefirst will drop these two components in here, your console and your kubefirst API. And those are the only two components that you need in order to create a management cluster.
And so it's really it's really the same experience when you use the marketplace, like the cluster 0, you got the installer, and basically you end up with the same experience, but on the cloud that you choose, as if you would have done kubefirst launch up, which would bring the installer on your local machine. So that's useful if you, as John said, like you already have a cluster, or for whatever reasons you have issues on your system, or like you don't want to install kubefirst locally on your machine, or maybe you don't have the right to. I know some company have like really strict security permission, and you cannot install new application for whatever reasons. So that's a great way to be able to do that.
Right on. So here's you. You have to make a decision about your install. You're either going to install via marketplace, you're going to install by brew installing kubefirst and running it on your laptop, or you're going to helm install to your pre-existing cluster. The most common way that our users typically install, and the way that we install at our own shop so it gets a ton of practice, is this way. You are brew installing kubefirst, the CLI. Yeah, let me group all that together so I don't start decapitating people. Let's group.
Boop. That would be nice.
Yeah. And then we can take this guy down here. This is actually misplaced. Let me kill that. New line. We are installing using the CLI. Now, when you run a cluster provisioning operation from cluster 0, whether it's this type, or this type, it always does the exact same thing. We need to run some infrastructure as code. We run Terraform in order to create your cloud. So if you chose the Cibo cloud, for example, we'll create in that cloud a new network, an S3 backend in that cloud for state storage, and a Kubernetes cluster. As you go down the chain of clouds and get more and more and more complex in your cloud, the number of objects that we have to create in that cloud grow from 3 in Cibo all the way up to 101 in AWS. Yeah. But one way or another, we're going to get you a network VPC, a Kubernetes cluster that's managed by that cloud. And that will be your new management cluster. Now, The management cluster, for anyone that's new to kubefirst or even platform building in the first place, a management cluster is generally just a concept. It's a type of cluster that you use for your architectural control plane of your cloud, of your other clusters, of your anything that needs to be centralized, things like security, things like IAM access stuff, all that type of centralized control plane management stuff. We always refer to that content going into your management cluster, which is architecturally going to be this box right here. We'll call it management.
If you can zoom the management cluster, it would be nice.
Sure can. Thank you, Fred. And if you'll keep me honest on that all day, I'll give you $1 at the end of the live stream. It's a pretty good deal.
I'm gonna be rich.
So, what goes in a management cluster? There's basically, say again?
The trifecta.
The trifecta. You're right. The trifecta does go in. There's a handful of pillars that we deliver to your management cluster. Forgive me there. So we have a control plane first and foremost. That's the types of tools that you're going to use in order to manage your infrastructure, manage your applications, manage your architecture. Then you have CI down here. CI is all the stuff that you need for conducting builds, for hosting charts, for hosting images. And generally speaking, we would consider anything that your application needs to do a build and update part of CI, including everything up to CD. CD belongs to the control plane. CI is everything else. So if you're building something at CI, if you're testing something at CI, if you're shipping something, a version to namespace of a cluster, that's the control plane. That's continuous delivery. We use GitOps for that, and that's something completely different. We have kubefirst itself because we're a different animal. We have users and secrets, which we'll get into ever so slightly. And then you have what Fred was referring to as the trifecta. We do love the trifecta. It's a bunch of apps that we use in order to manage how to get traffic correctly into your cluster from the outside world. So let's talk about the apps that are involved in these different pieces, starting with the control plane. So in the control plane over here, we're going to have Crossplane, Atlantis, Argo CD, and V cluster. Ooh, let me group those. And group. All right, V cluster goes over here. So this is our control plane that we deliver with kubefirst. And it's all batteries included. Everything's automated. Everything's ready to go with single sign-on and all the security implementations and everything that you need. And just to describe these, Argo CD is responsible for everything GitOps. And that's a loose definition. GitOps can be applications in the management cluster. GitOps can be applications in a downstream workload cluster. GitOps could even be the YAML that's needed to create the infrastructure for those downstream clusters. And we'll touch on all that super briefly, but that's what you should be thinking about when you think about Argo CD. It's that you have a GitOps repository with a whole bunch of configurations, and whatever they are in the main branch, Argo CD is going to try to make all those versions be the version that's in all of your desired clusters. Atlantis and Crossplane are sort of interesting. So we run Terraform to create your management cluster, but we don't want you to have to run Terraform on your laptop. We think that's a terrible access implementation with just no auditability. And if you're a single person shop, I guess we get it, but it's still better to run through a control plane. What Atlantis does is it lets you take that Terraform, and anytime you pull request changes to your Terraform, it will run a Terraform plan for you, put the Terraform plan in your pull request, and show you what would change if you were to apply it. If you like the change, you can type a comment, Atlantis apply, and Atlantis is the one that's responsible for doing all the Terraform execution. So what that means is it lets your developers contribute to your IAC without giving your developers access to your cloud and tools. It also means that you get a full audit log of every single change that's ever happened, who did it, who approved it, and it's all bound to your GitOps repository in a nice, clean way. So we love Atlantis. Sometimes, though, you don't want a human involved and you just want GitOps to be GitOps. And for that, we use Crossplane. Now, Crossplane is still kind of being experimented with a bit at kubefirst. We use it for cluster management only of workload clusters. So your management cluster, those resources are managed by Atlantis. There's a human involved. For your workload clusters, that starts out by default as Crossplane governed. And it's Crossplane that's responsible for the IAC execution of that Terraform code. The last detail, we're not going to touch on it too much, is vCluster. This is a technology that's included in your management cluster that allows you to put clusters inside that cluster. So it's pretty meta. When you do a kubefirst installation, we're actually going to start you out with 3 additional clusters beyond the management cluster. We start you out with a development, a staging, and a production cluster, but those are vCluster clusters. So they live inside your management cluster. You can also have those live as separate, isolated physical clusters. We'll talk about that a little bit, but that would not have to do with vCluster. vCluster is only for clusters that live inside your cluster.
And John, speaking about vCluster, Patrick has a question. And no, Patrick, I'm not going to wait until the end of the live stream. You deserve an answer right now. So the question is, do you use the vCluster implementation for preview environments?
For preview environment, you absolutely could. It's a great use case as preview environments. Developer specific environments as well. Sometimes instead of having a stack be created on a per pull request basis, maybe you have a developer that just wants to sort of go off on a fork of the operation and have their own individual stack while they iterate on something drastic on a spike or something like that. vCluster would be a great example for that. What we love about vCluster, so there's things to not love about virtual clusters, frankly. Being able to interact directly with a physical cluster that is directly in your cloud, that has an easy way to see it and get to it, and there's no ambiguity about where you are, that's valuable to a lot of organizations for a lot of great reasons. And it is truly what we would recommend for your production clusters. But if all you want out of it is isolation, you can get a fully functioning Kubernetes cluster that's empty with its own kubeconfig file that lives inside your management cluster, but you don't have the overhead of an entirely new cloud management control plane. So you're not paying any cost for an additional cluster in that regard. And from a resource consumption standpoint, it only takes in our default vCluster implementation is a vCluster that includes Nginx, Cert Manager, external DNS, external secrets operator, and reloader, and an instance of Metaphor. So 6 applications are in there. And you can run that completely isolated, full-blown Kubernetes cluster inside your management cluster, and it only costs you 0.2 of a CPU of CPU usage, and it only costs you 800 megs of memory to run that full cluster. So from a cost standpoint, if it's truly just isolation that you want, and you you don't want the physical element and cost of additional clusters. It's a really good pattern for that. It's a little bit cumbersome to use V clusters sometimes. And there's just additional rules and a little bit of additional thinking that you have to do. But they're very, very inexpensive, fast clusters if you're after isolation. So let's talk CI for a second. We have a whole bunch of pieces that we install into your management control plane for CI. The first most is GitHub versus GitLab. When you do an installation of kubefirst, you have to pick which Git provider you're going to use. And we won't install both of them into your management cluster. We'll make a smart decision based on which one you picked. But you'll either get a self-hosted GitLab runner or you'll get a self-hosted action runner controller. And any jobs that you run in your repositories that are hooked into kubefirst are going to run on these self-hosted runners. So you have full isolation of that execution. You're further isolated from the execution in the cloud. You're not running on shared nodes or anything like that. And it also doesn't cost you anything from a GitHub or GitLab use perspective if you're running them inside your own clusters. So there's some cost savings to be had there as well. We also installed Chart Museum. It's a very simple application that's basically just a shim on top of S3 that lets you store OCI chart images. And the last piece that we have is Argo Workflows. Argo Workflows is the piece that's actually doing all of the work when you do builds and Helm publishes and GitOps deployment to a dev stage prod environment. The mechanics of that automation are all being run from Argo Workflows. But when we deliver your management cluster to you, we'll set it up so that GitLab Runner is invoking those Argo workflows, or Actions Runner Controller is invoking those Argo workflows, so that the developer gets the execution feedback into their Git provider runtime environment. So even though we're using workflows to publish containers and publish charts, you're getting all the execution results in GitHub or in GitLab as a build pipeline, like you would expect if you were using that technology natively. So that's mostly all we want to say about CI. Next up is the kubefirst application itself is also going to be installed to your management cluster. And when you do a cluster provisioning operation, basically when you were back in this K3D cluster or whatever your cluster 0 was, we have two basic jobs to do. The first thing that we have to do is the kubefirst API is going to create the management cluster physical infrastructure itself. And then once that cluster is available and online, we are going to take this GitOps template. This is a detail I haven't really covered yet. So what we have as part of the CLI process is we have to ask you for three details. You have to tell us what cloud you want to use, what Git provider you want to use, and what DNS system you want to use. And when you tell us that information, what we're doing is we create a GitOps repository and we put it in your GitHub org or your GitLab group that you specify. So we pull this down. And if you said that you wanted Sivo GitHub, we'll go to the Sivo GitHub folder here. And this directory becomes your GitOps repository directory in your new GitOps repo. And then there's a bunch of variables in our template. We hydrate those variables with the details you give us about what your domain is and where you want this thing placed, what region you want it in, stuff like that. So this GitOps template repo is what's responsible for producing this GitOps repo that you get to keep forever. And what we love about that architecture so much is that because you keep this repo, everything about the platform is yours forever. We can't take it away from you. You're always allowed to eject from us. You're also free, if you want to create your own version of the GitOps template as a fork. And if you were to do so, when you run the kubefirst CLI install process, if you go to the advanced options, you can reference this fork instead of our upstream. And that lets you change the details of how this management cluster was created. But in any event, one way or another, this GitOps repository has the infrastructure as code that creates this cluster here. And then it also has all of the configurations for Argo CD, so that Argo CD knows what applications you're trying to deliver and where you're trying to deliver them to. So when Argo CD gets basically activated in this management cluster, there's all of these sequences of events that have to happen. And the first job of Argo CD is to get all of these apps safely into the management cluster. And to do that, there's all these orders of operations. I haven't even finished describing the applications that need to go in that management cluster. There's a few more in here for Ingress certs and host names. And there is also users and secrets applications, which I'll grab right here and paste over here. These are what we use for users and secrets. So let me talk about both of these super quick, and then we'll get back to Argo CD. So for users and secrets, we keep all of our users in Vault, and then we use external secrets operator to get secrets out of Vault and make them available as Kubernetes secrets for all your applications to read their secrets from Kubernetes. So that lets you have Vault as your source of truth. Nothing in any cluster ever talks to Vault except for your external secrets operator. External secrets operator is making all the secrets available for all the stuff. That way, if you ever decided you didn't like Vault anymore, you could replace it, drop in a cloud provider or whatever, and you wouldn't have to update all of your applications because they're all leveraging secrets produced by external secrets operator. Reloader is a little weapon that we have that is just a simple, tiny one-trick pony. All it does is it listens for any annotations that you've specified where you want to watch a secret, and if a secret changes, you want to do a rolling restart of a particular application. You can annotate that application with a reloader annotation, and anytime a secret updates in Vault, external secrets operator is going to put in the cluster, and then your app isn't going to reflect that secret change until it restarts. So reloader is responsible for that restart operation.
If I remember, John, I shared a live stream we've done on Recorder, and if I'm not wrong, that was the shortest live stream that we ever done, because as you said, like, it's a one-trick pony. It does it well, and it's really useful. But like, once we show people how it was working, how to implement it, we were like, okay, we're done.
Yeah, no, that was a nice quick one. In fact, I recall on that live stream, you were like, I don't know anything about Reloader. I know it restarts pods, but that's all I know about it. And I was like, yeah, that's the whole thing. We're done with the show. So anyway, and then I guess just a brief touch on these three. You have other people, we'll call them users. Let me draw them out here. They're usually angry, so let's go like that. They're really mad. They need to get to your apps that are inside your clusters. And in order to make that happen, there's these three pieces. So Ingress Nginx is the main one. Ingress Nginx basically is responsible for watching Ingress objects. And if you create an Ingress object, it will open up a avenue in your Kubernetes cluster to allow this guy to get into your cluster, even though it's on the inside and he's on the outside. Now, how is that person going to reach your service that's running inside the cluster? That's usually external DNS's job. So when you specify an ingress, you have to give it a host name. So you could call it metaphor.yourcompany.com. And this user is going to go to their browser, type metaphor.yourcompany.com, and they want that to go into the cluster. Now, the way that really works is when you specify an ingress, Ingress Nginx is going to create a load balancer out here. And let me just drop one of those there. That load balancer gets created. This user needs to hit that load balancer. And if they do, that load balancer will be configured to hit this Ingress Nginx pod service endpoint. Now, this load balancer is typically going to be some gross host name, something cloud oriented that's just like, a bunch of machine stuff that you don't care about and never want to show this user, or else he's going to get even more frowny. So that's where external DNS comes in. So with external DNS, it is also watching your ingresses. And when you said that it's metaphor.yourcompany.io for the host name, external DNS goes out to your DNS provider and says, let's create an A record automatically and point it to this load balancer real quick so that somebody can just go to metaphor.yourcompany.io and it'll make its way to this load balancer and get into your cluster. Well, that's all great and that works well, but they're going to go to that new endpoint in your cluster and they're going to get a certificate error. And that's where Cert Manager comes in. Cert Manager is also watching your ingresses and will wake up and say, hey, I see an ingress. That's a host name that I don't have a cert for. Let me go out to Let's Encrypt and run a HTTP01 challenge to prove that I am who I say that I am. Let me drop that out here. Drop that down just a little bit. So it'll reach out to Let's Encrypt and say, hey, I have a new host name and I need a certificate for it. Let's Encrypt is going to say, well, first I need to prove that you are who you say you are. And external DNS will say, all right, well, it's metaphor your company IO, and it'll create a temporary ingress to do an HTTP01 check to make sure that the value that it creates matches the value that this guy finds. That proves that you own the DNS, and then it gives you a cert. The cert goes as a secret into the same namespace, and then this guy is no longer sad, super happy, and loves the service that you're providing.
And
let's give
while the user is becoming happy, Patrick was saying, like, the thing I love about Kubernetes the most is how fast we cover various technologies in almost no time. Like, oh, and by the way, there is this other tool and this tool. And I don't know if you really meant Kubernetes, but I feel like it's like that for kubefirst. I always say that, like, kubefirst is a complex platform, not in the sense that, like, you end up with something complex, is that we tackle the complexity to have all those tools working together, so you end up with what I call a production ready clusters, because creating a cluster is easy. It's everything that's come after that is a little more complicated. So now you end up with a platform that manages secrets for you. Like, you have a management cluster, a GitOps repo, you have like workload clusters. We're going to talk a little more about that after. I'm going faster than John on this one, but yeah, I get the point, Patrick. And I think I forgot one of other Patrick's comment when you were talking about vCluster and a little bit of Argo CD. He said, yeah, Argo CD set generators. Especially the PR generator with vCluster is pretty crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Cert comes back. So those are the pieces. Now, how did these apps get configured so that they're fully automated, so that they all just like work and know about each other and everything else? That's all because of Argo CD, and more specifically, it's because in Argo CD, if we were to look at the GitOps repository that you get, and we'll just look at the template instead, you'll have a registry. No, sorry, a template called management. This is how your management cluster is constructed. So all the apps that we're showing here in this box are in here because they have YAML files in this directory. And that's how GitOps works. You just put files in this directory that's watched by Argo CD, and Argo CD is like, gotcha, boss. And it makes sure that whatever it is that you want as your desired state in Git becomes your actual state in that Kubernetes cluster. And so truly what we have is Argo CD responsible for the creation of vCluster, and responsible for the creation of Crossplane and Atlantis and external secrets. All of these applications all have to get created in this cluster, and it's all Argo CD that's doing that work to manage the version that's delivered, and also to manage the order of operations of what gets installed first, and then second, and then third. And then if you have to go back to what you installed second and reconfigure it in a fourth sync wave, you can do that. So it lets you untangle all of those chicken and egg scenarios of like, well, I want my secret to be in Vault, but I don't have Vault yet, so let me install it this way. And then once I have Vault, I'll change my configuration so that I can use Vault instead. All that kind of stuff can be dealt with through Argo CD sync waves in your app of apps pattern in your GitOps repository. So we've talked about the control plane pieces, the CI pieces. The users and secrets we touched on. We didn't get into users too much, but we've got a whole live stream on that. You've got ingresses, all the trifecta stuff so that you can get outside people into your cluster. And then lastly, you've got kubefirst itself. When you Helm install, you're not Helm installing this kubefirst, we are. But when we install kubefirst to your management cluster, we install it with three components. It's got the kubefirst API and console that we were referencing back here. It also has this third component. This is the only closed source component that we have at kubefirst. The entire platform's open source. Most of our user interface is also open source. There's some business logic that we keep closed source in EE that's responsible for physical cluster creation. And let's talk about that. So this console screen right here is your management creation screen. It's also your GitOps catalog. And you can click a button and say, I want a new cluster, and it's going to create a new cluster for you. Now, when it creates a cluster for you, what applications are going to go in it? The answer happens to be that it's going to include the entire trifecta, because you can't do anything without it if you want stuff to get into your cluster. And then it's also going to install an external secrets operator that is pre-configured to talk to this management cluster's Vault instance. So all of the security and authentication and everything will be automatically set up for you. It's going to include Reloader, and it's also going to include a sixth application called Metaphor that we'll talk about in just a sec. So let me grab those and come on, deets. I need to try that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Copy, paste. There they are. All right. And Reloader lost its logo, but let's just roll with it.
I'm sure you still get the full Reloader experience on the workload cluster, even if there's no logo.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Fred. So we'll call this cluster development as an example. Now, there's one more app that we have in those workload clusters when you do a default kubefirst install. And it's created from a different repository that we also create for you as part of the provisioning process. So up here, you were saying, hey, I want a new cluster, and you use kubefirst CLI and you create a console. And from that process, we create a GitOps repo for you that you get to keep. We also, right next to it in your same Git organization, are going to create a metaphor Git repository. And metaphor also comes from the GitOps template repository. We have this subfolder called metaphor, and it's just a sample React application. But what's cool about it is it's got a .argo folder in it that have some Argo workflows that we created that'll do things like publish containers, deal with your Helm charts, do automatic versioning of your Helm charts, and then deliver that using deploy and release to your development staging, and then on release to your production environment. And when we execute these Argo workflows, we're actually invoking them from either GitHub or GitLab. So if you're a GitHub shop, you'll have a .github workflows folder that has a main that's basically doing invocations of Argo publish. As an example here, that's your .argo
Could
publish.
you zoom, John?
Yes, sure can. Thank you. That's your Argo publish folder here. And so the end result is when you're and here, let me move this a little bit closer down here
and zoom again.
And zoom once more. Thank you, pal. So we've got, let's take GitHub as a common example. So you've got this metaphor repository, and we have it set up so that if anybody touches, if I go to, let me not go there. If I go to GitHub, this shows what the criteria is for when the job starts. So any change to the main branch is going to kick off that job. So you'll have any change to main branch is going to have the action runner controller wake up and say, hey, I've got something that I need to do. And in order to do that, it's going to call Argo workflows. Argo workflows, I don't have this diagrammed, but we also deliver some CWFTs. That stands for cluster workflow templates. And you can find those in your GitOps repository. We deliver those also to your under Argo workflows. There's a subfolder in here called CWFTs. And this is like the automation building blocks that we deliver with the platform so that you can really easily do publishes and delivery on GitOps. So here, for example, we have a CWFT Git that has some Git operations so that you can check out your repo with SSH or with HTTPS or whatever. And then we're invoking these workflows from Metaphor's Argo implementation. So when we look at publish, for example, this is calling CWFT Canico. This one's calling CWFT Git, calling the checkout with GitOps, whatever. So that's how builds work on kubefirst. And the end result is that we will actually build an image, drop it either in GitHub, GitLab, or your cloud, depending on the details you give us. And then we'll produce a chart. That chart is going to be published to Chart Museum. And then we will set a desired state in your GitOps repository. Oh, that's way too zoomed out. So we'll set a desired state over here that says that we would like this next version of Metaphor to be in the development environment. Because we're writing it to this main branch of the GitOps repo, Argo CD wakes up and says, looks like I have another job to do. And it's going to make sure that version of Metaphor makes it to your development cluster if you specified it to go to your development cluster. So that's how all that works. So let me drop Metaphor in here just so that it's represented. Do I have yeah, here's Metaphor. So we'll put Metaphor here. Actually, Metaphor lives in your development cluster itself. So that's how clusters are getting created when you're in kubefirst and saying, I would like a new physical cluster. Now, if instead of saying that you wanted a physical cluster, you said you wanted a virtual cluster, which is on the free tier always, that is this exact same process, except that we'll shrink it down and sorry, my mouse is stuck. So we'll shrink it down and then we'll squeeze it up inside your management cluster. So that is a virtual cluster and that is a physical cluster. That's truly the only difference between the two. If it's physical, it lives in your cloud. You can go to your cloud console and see it and download the kubectl to connect to it. If it's in here, then the only way to get to it is to connect to your management cluster, download a new kube config, and then you can literally connect through your management cluster into your development cluster. So again, like Patrick was saying at the start of the live stream, great for isolation scenarios, preview environments, developer environments, spike work, hackathons, anything like that, where you don't want a whole bunch of new cloud overhead and spend, but you do want to isolate the stuff that you're doing. vCluster is a great solution for that.
And on this one, John was a little bit lazy. He didn't recreate the diagram for vCluster, but like you can switch between physical and vCluster. And the other thing is that if you use the UI, the other cluster that you create with the management, we call them workload clusters. So yeah, just wanted to add a little bit of information here.
Right on. Thank you, buddy. So I guess a question that we should speak to is, why are these the applications that are in the development cluster? And can that be adjusted? The answer to why, first of all, is because these are all the usual suspects for every cluster that we ever create. You're always going to need to access something in it. If that's not true, you don't need this one, and you don't need this one, and you don't need this one possibly. But usually you have to get to something in that cluster. And if that's the case, an Ingress is always a nice, convenient way to get into a cluster app. But the definition of what apps get delivered to your clusters is all managed through fleet management on kubefirst. So that GitOps repository that we give you is going to have some templates in its root directory. Let me leave Metaphor, go back to Sivo GitHub. In this templates folder, we talked about the management cluster template and why the applications that are in the management cluster are in there is because they're in this management directory. Very similarly, we have a workload cluster for physical clusters and a workload V cluster for virtual clusters, and they're almost identical. They have all the same apps. The only difference is that when you're doing workload cluster, this infrastructure is some cross-planed Terraform implementation, whereas when you're doing a V cluster, you're not using Terraform to create a Kubernetes cluster in a cloud. You're using vCluster to create a cluster inside your management cluster. So that's really the only difference between those two. And there's a couple details about external secrets operator and how stuff works that's slightly different between the two, but they're the exact same applications by default. You're going to get your cert issuers with Let's Encrypt. You're going to get the trifecta of Cert Manager, external DNS, and Ingress Nginx. You're going to get an external secrets operator that's pre-configured to connect to your cluster, to your Vault clusters management your management clusters vault instance. There we go. And you also have this environment file that lets you bind to an environments directory for your apps that get delivered to environments, because you're probably a SaaS shop and you're probably building and delivering to DevStage Prod or something very similar. So that's the reason that those apps are what they are in here. And if you want them to be different, and some very common use cases is, well, this is great and an awesome start, but I want Prometheus in every cluster I create, or I want a Datadog agent in every cluster I create. Whatever it might be, you get to add whatever folder, whatever applications you want in your workload clusters. You just get to drop them in your template workload V cluster or your template workload cluster. And from that point forward, every time you create a cluster, it's going to have the apps that you specified in there. So this is really your area where all the heavy customization of how you build clusters goes. But you get the added benefit of already having that management control plane that you get to lean on. So if you need a secret, you have a place for secrets. If you need some infrastructure as code, you have a place for that to run. If you want it to be GitOps or managed by Atlantis so that you have a human involved, you have that solution solved. If you need single sign-on, if you need to be able to create an OIDC provider or an OIDC client so that you can use single sign-on in a new app and only give access to your engineers. All of that stuff is super easy on the kubefirst platform. It's just a matter of making some simple configurations and adding some stuff to your cluster, and you can turn this into whatever you want. So we're real excited about that part of our implementation of cluster management. It's very GitOps forward. And has been working very well for us so far. So because we have fleet management, when you create a development cluster, it looks identical to your staging cluster, your production cluster. They are truly representative of each other, with the only exception being whatever variables you specify in your cluster fleet management templating. And like I said before, these clusters can be outside this box and live in the cloud, or they can be inside this box as V clusters and live inside your management cluster. And then we're getting real close here, Fred, and I think we're doing pretty all right on time, I guess. The last bit of...
For kubefirst live stream.
For kubefirst, yeah, exactly. The last bit to talk through is the GitOps catalog apps. So we have, just like we have these two upstream Git repositories for GitOps template and for kubefirst, we also have, and I guess I'll leave that guy alone, but over here, we have another Git repository in our upstream that's called the GitOps catalog. Forgive me. So GitOps.
You needed your mouse.
I know, one of these years. So the GitOps catalog repository, let me bring it up on screen, is an open source repository where we want your contributions. Not that we don't want your contributions elsewhere, but it's really easy to get any application that you wish was on the platform super easily. So the way that the GitOps catalog works is we have a index YAML here. If you were to pull request a new one of these with your app name and a new folder in here that specifies what your how your app installs, then that's all it takes to have this really nice, rich experience where we can offer your application to all kubefirst users. So it's a very public implementation currently with the open source GitOps catalog upstream. You would have to contribute that to our upstream, and making it in the main branch of our upstream is automatically going to make it available in everybody's GitOps catalogs in the console application. And we have aspirations of on our pro tier, allowing you to host your own GitOps catalog. So if you wanted your private applications to be deliverable to these clusters as well, it's going to be very easy to follow the same methodology in order to get applications in those clusters. But at the end of the day, all of these apps are great apps that are great to use in your clusters. And we allow you to add a GitOps catalog app to either your management cluster here, or the clusters that you've already provisioned, or you can also install GitOps catalog apps directly to your template in your GitOps repository, so that that application that you picked gets installed with every single cluster, but it's pre-configured with everything so that it hooks into secrets and all that kind of good stuff. And we got some cool apps in here. None of these are applications that we feel like you must get on every install. And that's why they're in the catalog. We try to keep our opinions as limited as possible and give you as much of an opinion-free management cluster as we can. So even though we think that the dashboard's great, we think events is great, everybody loves Flappy K-Ray, that doesn't mean that it should be in every single cluster that's ever created by kubefirst. So this is the space for that type of an application. We know that you're going to love all kinds of other apps. Maybe you're not a Datadog user, you use New Relic or App Dynamics or something like, or the Prometheus stack. We would love those contributions, and we will maintain it so that we're able to get those applications in your management clusters and your workload clusters and your V clusters, so that everybody can have a singular GitOps experience on the platform.
Yeah, and those shown, like the icons shown on the screen, they're a subset of like what we have in the catalog. And I always feel the need to say that, like, we started the catalog not too long ago, so we are slowly adding application. I think I have like a list of 20 plus application in my to-do list that I would like to add, and it's really a mix between, like, it's good for any specific Kubernetes slash cloud native application or toolings that you need to within your clusters. But I think the catalog can also, as you can see, there is some example of like application that are not specific to Kubernetes, but like their application that you may need for your developer, like MySQL, or like the URLs that you see. It's a URL shortener application, so it has no relation whatsoever to cloud native or Kubernetes. It's just like a tool that I needed to use personally, so I just decided to add it in the catalog. So I think it's also good to have user-facing application that you may use. Like, I'm probably going to have WordPress because I use this on my own blog, and stuff like that. So it's a good mix between things that you need if you manage your cluster, but also if you need to deploy application for your users. Yeah, that's the place to do that.
Yep. And I think that's pretty much around the kubefirst block. We could go all year. It's an enormous platform. We cover a whole bunch of clouds. We could get into any details that you feel like I missed, but I think at a high level, this is about approximately what I was hoping everybody would take away. And if anybody has questions about details beyond this, our Helping Hands channel is a great place to start. And we're happy to talk to you guys about whatever questions this leaves you with. But hopefully this was a good walkthrough of the order of operations, how it all pieces together, what pieces are ours, what pieces are yours, how you can get started, what are V clusters, what are physical clusters, what's a cluster zero, what's a management cluster. I feel like we covered all those details pretty well here, and hopefully it's a good artifact for the community. So that's really all I had, Fred.
I think so. And when John say it's really all I have, Fred. Remember before the show, John was like, "Hey, like, do we have enough to talk for a live stream?" And I started laughing because if you're not new to kubefirst Live, except Reloader, I don't think we've done any shows under an hour, and I'm not even talking when we have guests. So yeah,
I know.
that is the type of show we're doing. But John, I have a really, really, really serious question for you. Um, and I don't know if you're going to know the answer, but do you know why did the IRS decide to investigate a software company that makes CLI softwares? And for those of
God,
you that are not in the United States, IRS is the Internal Revenue Service. They're basically the people like wanting you to do your taxes and checking if you're not frauding or do stuff. So they could be your friend or maybe not your friend, depending on how you live your life. But John, do you
give it
know
to me. Give it to give me the question one more time. I need one more shot at it. Why does the IRS? Why are they doing what now?
why they're decided to investigate a company that are making software that are making a CLI software, command line interface software?
Why would they look into a CLI company? I don't know. I give up.
John, the IRS decided to investigate that company because it was a shell company.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. Yeah. All right. We'll
That
play it.
I like that one. I like there were some jokes that I'm like, oh my god, that's terrible. This one is terrible, but I liked it. So thanks everyone for joining us. Ganesh, thanks for joining us, and it is always a pleasure. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, John. To be honest, John did all the job on that show. Good job, John. It was not easy to talk about the architecture at the same time, like moving diagrams, creating new, and now you're doing a great job. That was great.
Thank you,
I like that.
Fred. And
I like that.
you always deflect your value here, and I always ride that wave until you're not here, and it's time for another kubefirst Unhinged episode. And those kubefirst Live Unhinged episodes where you're not around, I truly appreciate how much it is that you're doing behind the scenes. So thank you right back for all that you're doing for us.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And brace yourself because you're gonna have two shows in June where I'm not gonna be there. So
Oh, here
prepare
we
yourself,
go.
folks.
Jared, I hope you're listening. Here comes Cars and Kubernetes, buddy.
Exactly. And Patrick, thank you to us, but thanks to you for joining the show again and again and again for your question, comments that always make, as I said at the beginning, the show way more amazing. And you probably notice I always share a lot of I always push a lot of banners during the show about like the stuff, like to give you information where to go. This one was particularly AV and like sharing links with you because mostly actually most of the technologies that John talked when he was doing the diagrams, we've done live stream specifically about those one, as I was saying at the beginning, in-depth shows. So now you have the links to all those shows if you want to learn more about specific technologies that we talked in a high level fashion today. So on that note, I think that's the end of the show. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks for the people watching the recording, and see you in 2 weeks for the next kubefirst Live.
Can't wait.
Bye,
See you there,
everybody.
guys.